Tonight's story has endured not because it is sensational, but because it unsettles quietly. What was it? I admit that I hesitate to share this strange story. The events I am about to describe are incredibly extraordinary. Because of this, I fully expect to meet with disbelief and scorn. I accept that reaction in advance. I believe I have the courage to face those who doubt me. After careful thought, I decided to share these facts as simply and directly as possible. I observed these events last July. In the entire history of physical science, they are completely unparalleled. I live at number 5 on 26th Street in New York. This house is curious in many ways. For the last 2 years, it has held a reputation for being haunted. The house is very spacious. A grand hall leads to a large spiral staircase that winds through the center of the building. The various rooms are also quite large. A well-known New York merchant named Mr. Adams built it about 20 years ago. 5 years ago, he shocked the commercial world with a massive bank fraud. As everyone knows, Mr. Adams escaped to Europe and died of a broken heart shortly after. When the news of his death reached America, rumors quickly spread that number 5 was haunted. Legal actions forced his widow out of the home. It was then occupied only by a caretaker and his wife. A house agent had placed them there to watch over the property until it could be rented or sold. However, these caretakers claimed they were tormented by unnatural noises. Doors would open all by themselves. At night, leftover furniture was piled up by unseen hands. Invisible feet walked up and down the stairs in broad daylight. This was accompanied by the rustle of unseen silk dresses and the feeling of invisible hands gliding along the massive stair railings. Terrified, the caretaker and his wife refused to stay. The house agent simply laughed, fired them, and hired new people. Yet, the noises and supernatural events continued. Soon, the entire neighborhood knew the story. As a result, the house sat empty for 3 years. Several people tried to buy it. Unfortunately, they always heard the unpleasant rumors before closing the deal and walked away. This was the situation when my landlady had a bold idea. She ran a boarding house on Bleecker Street, but wanted to move further uptown. She decided to rent number 5 on 26th Street. Luckily, her current boarders were a brave and logical group of people. She presented her plan to us and honestly shared all the ghostly rumors about the new building. 2 timid people, a sea captain and a man from California, immediately announced they would move out. However, the rest of Mrs. Moffat's guests agreed to follow her into this supposed haunted house. We moved during the month of May. Everyone was absolutely charmed by our new residence. Naturally, as soon as we settled into number 5, we began waiting for the ghosts. We eagerly anticipated their arrival. Our conversations at dinner revolved around the supernatural. I suddenly became a person of great importance. Word had gotten out that I knew a lot about supernatural history, and had even written a ghost story. If a floorboard happened to creak while we sat in the large drawing room, everyone fell silent. We were always ready for the clanking of chains or the appearance of a spirit. We spent a full month in a state of high psychological excitement. However, we eventually had to admit that absolutely nothing supernatural had happened. This was very disappointing. That was the state of things when a truly awful and unexplained event occurred. My mind still spins just thinking about it. It was the 10th of July. After dinner, my friend Dr. Hammond and I went to the garden to smoke our evening pipes. The doctor and I shared similar ways of thinking. We were also linked by a shared vice. We both smoked opium. We knew each other's secret and respected it. We loved the wonderful expansion of thought it provided. We enjoyed the way it sharpened our senses and gave us a boundless feeling of connection to the entire universe. It was an unimaginable spiritual bliss that I would never trade away. At the same time, I hope you, the reader, never taste it. On that evening of July 10th, the doctor and I drifted into a deeply philosophical mood. We lit our large pipes. They were filled with fine Turkish tobacco and a small piece of opium. We paced back and forth while talking. A strange darkness took over our thoughts. Our minds refused to focus on happy or bright subjects. For some unknown reason, our conversation kept turning to dark and gloomy topics. We tried to talk about beautiful things, like the grand palaces and lively markets of the East. It was no use. Dark thoughts kept rising up and expanding, blotting out everything bright from our vision. Eventually, we gave in to this dark mood and indulged in gloomy speculation. We talked for a while about the human mind's love for mysticism and terrible things. Then, Hammond suddenly turned to me and asked a question. What do you consider to be the greatest element of terror? The question puzzled me. I knew that many things were terrible, but it struck me for the first time that there must be one ultimate source of fear. There must be a king of terrors to which all others surrender. What could it be? What circumstances would create it? I confess, Hammond, I replied to my friend, I have never considered the subject before. I feel that there must be one thing more terrible than any other. I cannot even attempt a vague definition, though. I am somewhat like you, Harry, he answered. I feel capable of experiencing a terror greater than anything the human mind has ever imagined. It would be something that combines completely unnatural and fearful elements. The creepy voices in scary novels are awful. The monsters in those old books are frightening. But, he added, shaking his head gloomily, there is something even more horrible than all of those. Look here, Hammond, I replied. Let us drop this kind of talk, for heaven's sake. We will suffer for it later. Depend on it. I do not know what is the matter with me tonight, he replied. My brain is running wild with weird and awful thoughts. I feel like I could write a terrifying story tonight if I only had the skill. Well, if we are going to keep talking like this, I am going to bed, I said. Opium and nightmares should never be mixed. It is so hot out here. Good night, Hammond. Good night, Harry, he said. Pleasant dreams to you. And to you, I joked. Watch out for ghouls and monsters. We parted ways and went to our own rooms. I undressed quickly and got into bed. As usual, I took a book with me to read myself to sleep. I rested my head on the pillow and opened the book. Instantly, I threw it across the room. It was a history of monsters that I had recently bought. Given my current state of mind, it was the worst possible thing to read. I decided to go to sleep right away. I turned down the gas lamp until only a tiny blue point of light remained. Then, I closed my eyes to rest. The room was pitch black. The tiny speck of gaslight did not even illuminate 3 inches around the burner. I threw my arm over my eyes to shut out the darkness and tried to think of nothing. It was useless. The dark themes Hammond had brought up in the garden kept invading my mind. I fought against them. I tried to make my mind completely blank. Yet the fearful thoughts kept crowding in. I lay there as still as a corpse, hoping my physical stillness would calm my mind. Suddenly, an awful incident occurred. Something heavy dropped straight from the ceiling and landed right on my chest. The very next instant, I felt two bony hands wrap around my throat. They were trying to choke me. I am not a coward, and I have considerable physical strength. The sudden attack did not stun me. Instead, it shocked every nerve into action. My body reacted purely on instinct before my brain could even process the terror. Instantly, I wrapped my arms around the creature. I squeezed it against my chest with all the strength of absolute despair. Within seconds, the bony hands on my throat loosened. I was finally able to breathe again. Then, a truly awful struggle began. I was trapped in total darkness and completely ignorant of what this thing was. My grip kept slipping because the attacker felt entirely naked. Sharp teeth bit into my shoulder, neck, and chest. I had to constantly protect my throat from its strong and agile hands. I could not pin those hands down, no matter how hard I tried. Fighting this creature took every ounce of strength, skill, and courage I possessed. Finally, after a silent and exhausting struggle, I managed to overpower my attacker. I used an incredible burst of strength to get it underneath me. I pinned my knee hard against what felt like its chest. I knew I had won. I rested for a moment to catch my breath. I could hear the creature panting beneath me in the darkness. I could even feel the violent beating of its heart. It seemed just as exhausted as I was, which brought me a small amount of comfort. Just then, I remembered something. I always kept a large silk handkerchief under my pillow. I reached up and instantly found it. Within seconds, I used it to tie the creature's arms together. I finally felt somewhat safe. The only thing left to do was turn on the gas lamp. I wanted to see what my attacker looked like before waking up the rest of the house. I admit I felt quite proud for not calling out for help earlier. I had wanted to capture this thing all by myself. I never loosened my grip for a second. I slid off the bed and dragged my captive down to the floor with me. I only had to take a few steps to reach the gas lamp. I moved with extreme caution while holding the creature in a tight grip. Finally, I reached the tiny speck of blue light. Quick as lightning, I let go with one hand and turned the gas all the way up. The room flooded with bright light. Then, I turned to look at my captive. I cannot even begin to describe how I felt when the light came on. I must have screamed in sheer terror. Less than a minute later, my room was completely crowded with the other people from the house. I still shudder when I think about that awful moment. I looked down and saw absolutely nothing. Yes, I had one arm wrapped tightly around a heavy and breathing shape. My other hand was gripping a warm throat made of solid flesh. I had a living creature in my grasp. Its body was pressed hard against mine. The gas lamp was shining brightly on us. Yet, I could not see a thing. There was no outline. There was no vapor. There was nothing at all. Even now, I struggle to understand the situation I was in. I cannot fully recall the shock of that moment. My imagination simply cannot process such an awful paradox. The creature breathed. I felt its warm breath on my cheek. It struggled fiercely to get away. It had real hands that clutched at my clothes. Its skin was smooth, just like my own. It lay right there, pressed close against me. It was as solid as a stone, but it was completely invisible. I am surprised I did not faint or go crazy on the spot. Some deep instinct must have kept me grounded. Instead of dropping the terrible monster, I gained a sudden burst of strength. My horror fueled me. I tightened my grip so hard that I could feel the invisible creature shivering in agony. Just then, Hammond rushed into my room, leading the rest of the household. He saw my face, and I imagine I looked absolutely terrifying. He hurried forward and shouted out, "Great heaven, what has happened?" "Hammond! Hammond!" I cried out. "Come here, quickly. Oh, this is awful. Something attacked me in bed. I have a hold of it now, but I cannot see it. I simply cannot see it." Hammond saw the genuine horror on my face. He took a cautious step forward, looking anxious and confused. Suddenly, I heard several people in the doorway giggling. That quiet laughter made me absolutely furious. How could they laugh at a person in my position? It felt incredibly cruel. Looking back now, I can understand why it looked funny. They saw a man wrestling violently with empty air and screaming for help against a ghost. But at that moment, my rage was immense. If I had the power, I would have struck the mocking crowd dead right where they stood. "Hammond! Hammond!" I cried again in despair. "For God's sake, come here. I can only hold this thing a little while longer. It is overpowering me. Please help me." "Harry," Hammond whispered as he approached me, "you have been smoking too much opium." "I swear to you, Hammond, this is not a vision," I answered in a low voice. "Do you not see how its struggles are shaking my entire body? If you do not believe me, then convince yourself. Feel it. Touch it." Hammond reached out and placed his hand exactly where I pointed. A wild cry of horror burst from his lips. He had felt it. Within moments, he found a long piece of heavy cord in my room. He immediately started winding and knotting it around the body of the unseen being I held in my arms. "Harry," he said in a rough and shaken voice. He was trying to stay calm, but he was deeply moved. "Harry, it is completely secure now. You can let go if you are tired. The thing cannot move." I was completely exhausted, so I gladly let go. Hammond stood there, holding the ends of the rope. The cord was twisted tightly around his hands. Right in front of him, the rope was laced and interlaced in the air. It stretched tightly around a completely empty space, supporting itself by magic. I had never seen a man look so amazed and terrified. Still, his face showed immense courage and determination. His lips were white but set firmly. Anyone could see that he was scared, but he refused to back down. The other guests watched this extraordinary scene between Hammond and me. They saw us acting out a pantomime of tying up an invisible, struggling creature. They saw me collapse from exhaustion once my job as jailer was done. The confusion and terror that gripped the bystanders was beyond description. The more fearful guests ran away from the room immediately. The few who stayed huddled near the doorway. Nothing could convince them to step closer to Hammond and his invisible prisoner. Despite their fear, they still did not fully believe us. They lacked the courage to touch the creature themselves, so they chose to doubt its existence. I begged the men to come closer. I asked them to just reach out and touch the invisible living being to prove it was real. They refused to approach. They kept asking how a solid and breathing body could possibly be invisible. I decided to show them my reply. I gave Hammond a signal. We both swallowed our disgust and grabbed the bound creature. We lifted it from the floor and carried it over to my bed. It weighed about as much as a teenage boy. "Now, my friends," I said. Hammond and I held the creature suspended in the air right above the mattress. "I will give you absolute proof that we are holding a solid, heavy body that you simply cannot see. Please watch the surface of the bed very closely." I was surprised by my own courage in handling this strange event so calmly. However, I had recovered from my initial terror. A strong sense of scientific curiosity had taken over my feelings. The bystanders stared intently at my bed. I gave the signal, and Hammond and I dropped the creature. A loud thud echoed as the heavy body landed on the soft mattress. The wooden frame of the bed creaked loudly under the sudden weight. A deep and distinct impression appeared on the pillow and the blankets. The watching crowd let out a quiet gasp of horror and quickly ran out of the room. Hammond and I were left completely alone with our mystery. We sat in silence for a long time. We listened to the low and irregular breathing of the creature on the bed. We watched the bedclothes rustle as the monster struggled weakly against the ropes. Finally, Hammond spoke up. "Harry, this is awful," he said. "Yes, it is truly awful," I agreed. "But it is not entirely unexplained," he replied. "Not unexplained?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "Nothing like this has ever happened since the birth of the world. I do not know what to think, Hammond. I just pray that I am not going mad. I pray this is not a crazy hallucination. Let us think about this logically, Harry," he said. "We have a solid body that we can touch, but we cannot see it. This fact is so unusual that it terrifies us. But is there truly no parallel for this in nature? Think about a piece of pure glass. It is solid, but it is transparent. A slight chemical impurity is the only thing that stops it from being completely invisible. In theory, it is entirely possible to make a piece of glass that does not reflect a single ray of light. If the glass were perfectly pure, sunlight would pass right through it, just like it passes through the air. We cannot see the wind, but we can certainly feel it." "That is all very well, Hammond," I replied. "But those are dead objects. Glass does not breathe, and air does not breathe. This thing has a beating heart. It has a mind of its own. It has lungs that draw in air and push it out. You are forgetting the stories we have been hearing lately," the doctor answered gravely. "People have been going to seances and spirit circles. They claim that invisible hands have touched them in the dark. They say those hands feel warm and fleshy, pulsing with mortal life. What are you saying? Do you think this thing is a spirit?" I asked. "I do not know what it is," he replied solemnly. "But I swear I will thoroughly investigate it with your help." We stayed awake and watched the creature together. We sat by the bed and smoked our pipes all night long. The unearthly being tossed and panted until it finally wore itself out. Soon, its breathing grew low and steady, and we knew it had fallen asleep. The next morning, the entire house was wide awake. The boarders gathered in the hallway outside my room. Hammond and I were treated like local heroes. We had to answer 1,000 questions about the condition of our extraordinary prisoner. Even so, not a single person in the house would dare step foot inside the room with us. The creature woke up shortly after. We knew this because the blankets began moving violently as it tried to escape again. It was a truly terrible sight. We could only see the secondary effects of its awful, agonizing struggles for freedom. During the long night, Hammond and I had thought hard about how to reveal the shape of this monster. We had carefully passed our hands over its body to learn what we could. Its basic shape felt mostly human. It had a mouth. Its head was round, smooth, and completely bald. It had a flat nose that barely stuck out from its face. Its hands and feet felt small, much like a young boy's. At first, we thought about laying the creature on the floor and tracing it with chalk. We would draw around it, just like a shoemaker traces a foot. We quickly gave up on that plan. A flat chalk outline would tell us nothing about what its face or body actually looked like. Then, a brilliant idea struck me. We could make a mold of it using plaster of Paris. This would give us a solid statue of the creature and answer all our questions. The problem was figuring out how to do it. The monster's constant struggling would ruin the wet plaster. Then I had another idea. We could give the creature chloroform. It clearly had lungs, since we could hear it breathing. Once we put it to sleep, we could do whatever we wanted. Dr. X was sent for immediately. After the good doctor recovered from his initial shock, he carefully administered the sleeping gas. 3 minutes later, the creature was unconscious, and we removed the ropes. We brought in a professional artist, who quickly covered the invisible body with wet clay. 5 minutes later, we had a perfect mold. By that evening, we had poured the plaster and created a rough statue of our mystery. It was shaped like a man. It was twisted, ugly, and horrible, but it was definitely a man. It was small, standing just over 4 feet tall. However, its arms and legs showed unparalleled muscular strength. Its face was more hideous than anything I had ever seen before. No famous artist could ever paint something so terrifying. It looked exactly like a legendary ghoul. Its sharp teeth and cruel features made it look like it could easily feed on human flesh. We had satisfied our curiosity. Next, we forced everyone in the house to swear to secrecy. Then, we faced a new problem. What were we going to do with this monster? We could not keep such a horror in the house. We also could not release such an awful being back into the world. I admit that I would have gladly voted to kill it. But who would take the blame for that? Who would volunteer to execute a creature that looked so much like a human? We debated this problem gravely for several days. Meanwhile, all the other boarders packed up and left. Mrs. Moffat was in absolute despair. She threatened to sue Hammond and me if we did not remove the monster. Our answer was simple. "We will move out if you like," we told her. "But we refuse to take this creature with us. You can remove it yourself. It appeared in your house, so the responsibility is yours." Of course, she had no answer to that. Mrs. Moffat could not find anyone willing to go near the room, no matter how much money she offered. Finally, the problem solved itself. The creature died. Hammond and I found it cold and stiff in the bed one morning. Its heart had stopped beating, and its lungs had stopped breathing. We hurried to bury it in the garden. Dropping that invisible corpse into the damp dirt was a very strange funeral. I gave the plaster statue to Dr. X. He still keeps it on display in his private museum on 10th Street. I am now preparing to leave on a long journey, and I may never return. Because of this, I have written down the details of this event. It remains the most incredible and singular thing I have ever experienced. If you feel this telling warrants it, a kind rating may be left behind. Good night. Thanks for listening to Hearthside Horrors. Please note that the narration in today's episode was produced using high-fidelity synthetic narration. Sleep well.